Good morning, church family and friends. It's Pastor Terry and it's Pastor George. And we finished our study in Philippians yesterday, so we are going to do an interview with Pastor George today. So I've got a list of questions that I've created. Kind of started off to be a little light, but the more that I started putting these questions on the list, it got a little heavy, if you will. So we're just going to go with it the way I've got here. So Pastor George, welcome.
Thank you.
And
Good to be here.
Want to ask you, just start off with, you were born in Nigeria. Tell us about your family and from Nigeria.
Okay, well, I was born in Nigeria. My parents were with a mission called Sudan Interior Mission at the time. And I have five of us were born there, and then one more was born here after they came back to the States. Sort of a late addition to the family. Most of my brothers and sisters in Nigeria were all born in a mission hospital. I was the odd man out, maybe in more ways than one, but I came a little early apparently, and so I was born in a government hospital a little closer to home. She couldn't wait for the mission airplane to come in and take her to the mission hospital. And that's where I was born and raised. Other than furloughs, basically grew up in Nigeria and came back to the United States in 1970 as I was going into my junior year in high school. Finished up my last 2 years of high school here, one in South Carolina, one in North Carolina.
Okay, and since you talked about education, tell us a little bit about that. What was, for those of us that are so Americanized in our lifestyle, tell us about a little bit about the education there in Nigeria.
Well, we all went to a mission boarding school. SIM had set up a school for missionaries' children, and there were a couple of them there. One was Kent Academy, set up by SIM, and the other one was Hillcrest, where we went after ninth grade. We had it was set up originally because prior to the boarding school being there, somewhere in the late 1940s, I guess, and prior to that, children had to stay here in the States. Their parents went back to the field without their children when they were of school age. So they didn't see their parents for 4 years at a time.
Wow.
While they were in school. And there were several boarding schools here in the States that were set up that the children went to. So they wanted to have a place where the children could go to school and be on the American system or whatever the school was set up for, which was primarily the American education system. And we saw our parents several times a year. We were home for Christmas. We were home over the summer. Our parents would usually take their vacation time so they could spend a week or two with us right close to the school during the year. And so far better than the system. It was still hard leaving home and going off to boarding school, but that was the education system of the time. And we all grew up there, became practically brothers and sisters in the boarding school. That was where most of the children, some tried homeschooling, but there was not the homeschooling curriculum in those days that there is today. So the boarding school was the best way to go at the time.
And that was your normal.
Yes.
And the other missionary children. That was your normal.
And in many of the pagan areas where my parents worked, my father would not have easy access to the women. He was cut off from any evangelism or anything to the women of the tribe for the most part. So my mother had the opportunity to minister to the women in a way that otherwise she would not have been able to. And if she had had us there, that would have limited that to a large degree. So it was just like you said, it was our normal. That was what life was. And we knew it was coming. We went off to boarding school. It wasn't easy, but that was the way it was. And we learned to live with it.
So you come back to the States in your junior year, finish up high school, and then you go to college.
Well, I worked for a couple of years.
Okay.
I knew what God had called me to do. God called me to the ministry when I was a junior in high school. There's no doubt in my mind what he wanted to do. I did what I call my Jonah experience, where I thought about the mission field and I thought about all the things, as I say, some of the things, living in places where you had no electricity or running water, no indoor plumbing, things that as I have said, go slither and bump in the night and all of that. And I thought, okay, maybe there's another way to do this. And I thought, okay, I'll get an education of some sort, a trade perhaps. And if the ministry thing doesn't work out, I'll have something to fall back on. And I tried that. I went to a trade school for a while, studied electronics, and thought that was going to work. I was miserable, and I knew what God had called me to do. I went home. My dad was pastoring a church up in Maine at the time, Eastport, Maine, and I lived up there and worked for several months, and then they actually relocated down to Pennsylvania, and that's where I got in contact with Lancaster Bible College, and that's where I went to college, graduated with a bachelor's degree in Bible. And I said, actually, I think the Lord had to hold me up for a couple of years till Nancy got there, because I have no idea in God's sovereign plan what would have happened if I had gone right into Lancaster Bible College or anywhere else. But Nancy was a couple of years behind me, and so that worked out perfectly. I met her pretty early on, and we got married and prepared to go to the mission field.
Well, once again, you segue well into the next item, and that is, tell us about your family, your own family.
Yeah, we have two children, our son and daughter, and they both live right now. They live up in Watertown, New York, and we have 13. I added one. We have 12 grandchildren, maybe 13. I don't know about it, but we have 12 grandchildren. Our son has 5, and our daughter has 7, and they live fairly close to each other up there in New York. They had been working together. Our son recently left the business. It's a FedEx business that our daughter and son-in-law own, and our son left there. He's looking for a ministry right now, in camp ministry or wherever God might open the door. But that is our family, and they have grown up in pastor's, missionary home, knowing a little bit about what the ministry is about. And our son has felt that God has called him to ministry.
Awesome. Okay. Now you've been in ministry for your whole life. You were on the mission field, then you all came back to the States.
Okay.
Just give us a low point in ministry that you've had to deal with.
Yeah, that was when I was looking over some of the things that we'd be talking about. I thought, what is the low point? And ministry has its ups and downs, so there's low points along the way. But I always felt God had called me to foreign missions. I never saw myself in anything but in more remote areas, areas where the gospel had perhaps never been preached before. So we headed off to the mission field. God led us to a ministry out in the Pacific Islands. We were on the island of Guam for a year in preparation to go out to the outer islands and begin a church planting ministry. And the mission had actually asked us at one point to kind of pioneer a church planting ministry in the Micronesian islands in the Pacific. And so that was what we headed off to do. We ended up on the little island of Kasharai, a tiny little atoll, pretty much in the middle of the Pacific. And we were there for several months, almost a year. And our Nancy was expecting our daughter at the time, and she had the opportunity to come back to the States to deliver the baby. There was a doctor on the island that said, in no uncertain terms, do not deliver your baby here if you can possibly help it. The infant mortality rate was extremely high. And she said, if at all possible, if you can get to Guam, that's good. If you can get to Hawaii, that's better. If you can get to the U.S. mainland, that's the best. And so through a relative on Nancy's side of the family, they paid her way to come back to the United States and have the baby here. So our son Bill came back with her. The day she went into the hospital, our son had a grand mal seizure, and they didn't know what it was. She came home with the baby, and 11 days after that first one, he had another grand mal seizure. And he was diagnosed at that time with some form of epilepsy, although they had no idea what it really was. And that was what they put on it because they were trying to figure out what was going on. And the doctor asked us about our medical care on the island, and I said it's pretty much non-existent. They had an ambulance, but they used it to haul firewood more than patients. And he said you would have to have access to 2 things. You would have to have easy access to oxygen and some kind of a tranquilizer type thing, and just in case he would go into what they called status seizure. And we said that is just not something we could guarantee. He said then if you there's a good chance he would go into that and you would lose him, he would die. So we said, okay, well, that's not going to be where we're going to, probably this is God's way of redirecting us. Brought us back to the United States. We spent 20 years in church planting ministry here in the United States, first with a mission called American Mission for Opening Churches up in northern New York. We saw one church planted there, went down to Conshohocken, Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia, and saw a church move to where they were able to call a pastor, and then went back up to northern New York to help start a new church up there. And then as that church got to the point where it's self-supporting, we got involved with Grace Mission to Haiti, and we joined Grace Mission to Haiti, and in 2005 moved down here to Florida and began our work with the work in Haiti, and now it's expanded to the Caribbean and the United States as well.
One of the things on the sidebar that we here in America need to understand, and that is missionaries face issues, circumstances in their life settings, in the fields in which they serve, that we don't face here. We've got medical care available to us, those kinds of things. So it allows us to know better how to pray for our missionaries that are serving in whichever field they're serving. So now that we've talked about a low in ministry, tell us about a high in ministry.
Well, I've already talked about our church planting ministry here in the United States in particular, and I think every step of ministry where you see people come to the Lord and you see progress being made, even on the island of Kashrai. Nancy and I had learned the language, and I had started a Bible study with a small group of young men with the idea that ultimately we're going to plant a church. So that was an exciting part of the ministry. But each time a church was planted in Chestertown, New York, and then in Conshohocken, and then in Gouverneur, New York, each time a church moved to the point where they were ready to call a pastor and go on their own, that was a high point. And so there's been more than one. To get involved in ministry like that and see people come to the Lord, and that was the key, to watch people come to the Lord and watch them grow in the Lord is an exciting thing. And people say, well, you planted 3 churches. No, I didn't plant 3 churches. God planted 3 churches. I just had the privilege of being there when he did it. That's the high point in seeing God work.
Well stated. And now I said this thing started off to be kind of a lighthearted thing to get to know Pastor George on more of his human side, if you will, if I can say it that way, rather than the spiritual side. Yet it stays really, because that's who he is. And that's what, I want you to get more than anything else out of this interview, is that you can't dissect that or compartmentalize that with the life that he lives. What's your favorite book of the Bible?
Ephesians.
That was too easy.
Yeah, that was a book that I studied. I took a course in Bible college, and we hit the book of Ephesians, and that probably was key to my learning to preach. As a part of that course, we had to outline the book of Ephesians, and I saw the emphasis on the grace of God in the book of Ephesians, probably a key theme in the book of Ephesians. And talks about our relationship with God and his saving grace. And as I looked at that, it just got to be, probably because that was the first book I really preached through, that became a key part of my walk with the Lord.
And it would kind of make sense that if that's your favorite book of the Bible, that your favorite verse of the Bible would come from Ephesians. Hold on, not necessarily the case. What's your favorite verse in the Bible?
It's a verse that we had basically chosen as theme for our ministry, and it's out of 1 Kings 8:60 that says, that all the people of the earth may know that the Lord is God and there's none else. And that has been fundamental to everything we have done in ministry. We have done a lot of things, especially in working with Grace Mission to Haiti, and now called Grace Mission to the World. We have helped to support children's ministries. We have helped with food programs. We've seen churches planted in Haiti and things like that. But ultimately, it all comes back to that one thing. When we have a food program, it is a means of delivering the gospel. When we take medical teams, it is the means of delivering the gospel. Children's ministry is to bring children to the Lord so that they will grow up in the church and become leaders in the church. So that is really the key thing, that all the people of the earth may know. It doesn't matter where God leads us, whether it is Haiti or Africa or Wellington or wherever it might be, that people would come to know the Lord and to know that He alone is the answer to the problems of the world.
Yeah, our God has had, he's always had a people. He's had his chosen people. He has the church. And yet, through the chosen people, through the church, God has let them know that through them, he wants the whole world to know him.
Amen.
And so what a great verse that is. You know, a lot of churches deal with something called a purpose statement, a mission statement. The closer that that purpose and mission statement is to Scripture, the better that church is going to be, no doubt about it. What advice would you give someone if they were to ask you, how can I know God's will for my life? What would you say to them?
That's an interesting question, because I remember I was looking at this, I was thinking about it back in Bible college. Whenever they would have any kind of a conference, spiritual life conference, missions conference, whatever it might be, that usually there was at least one workshop or seminar or something on finding the will of God, and they were always packed out, because that's a big question. How do I know God's will? And I think for each person, you have to look at the circumstances of your life. What has God brought into your life? What are the options that are in front of you? And this is the emphasis that I put on people looking for that purpose of that will of God, is what are the gifts and abilities that God has given you, and how can you best use them to serve the Lord? So there's somebody that said, well, I can't really get in front of people. I'm not a good preacher. I'm not a good speaker. Okay, well, then he probably didn't call you to preach. They say, well, I'm really good with my hands. I'm a good carpenter. I'm a good whatever it might be. Okay, well, maybe God's called you to be a Christian carpenter or a Christian welder or a Christian concrete, whatever it might be. So use that because that's the ability God has given you. And then look at the options and say, okay, based on the ability and the spiritual gifts that God has given me, how can I best serve Him? And I think that is the thing that will guide you. Look at the circumstances of life. Where has God put you? You go back to, and I have to watch I don't start preaching here, but look back at what God told Moses. He said, Moses, what do you have in your hand? And Moses looked down, it was a shepherd's staff. And God went from there to show him, whatever you have in your hand, that's what God wants you to use.
Yeah, we need to make sure we keep that simple. Sometimes I think it's easy to try to complicate that whole process, and yet God, through His Word, the way He's revealed Himself to us, though that's very God-sized, He's kept it very simple, and I think we need to make sure we do that. Loved your answer there. People are supposedly have a bucket list, whatever that means. Do you have one? If you do, what's on your bucket list?
I've never really thought about a bucket list. One thing that I enjoyed that I did back in 2005, the former director of Grace Mission, Jim Evans, and I took a bike tour, and we rode recumbent bicycles from Bangor, Maine to South Georgia. And we only stopped in South Georgia because a hurricane blew through and we decided it was time to go home. But I thoroughly enjoyed that. We had some really dangerous times. Sometimes we look back and say, Jim and I will get together and we'll say, what on earth were we thinking when we did that? Well, we weren't thinking probably. But it was a very enjoyable time. And the one thing that I said years ago, I want to walk the Appalachian Trail from one end to the other. Well, there is now apparently, and I haven't researched it a whole lot, there apparently is a bike trail or an activity trail that runs across the United States. Now, I'm getting too old to talk about some of these things, but I would love to take a bike and ride across the United States in that way. That's a bucket that will probably never get filled, but it's one of those things I said, I'd love to do that. I would love to do more of that kind of biking, as I just look at, there's nothing spiritual to it, but it could be used as a way to raise awareness for the needs. That's why we did the bike tour in 2005, to raise the awareness of needs in Haiti. And we had opportunity to stop in churches and speak to people. At times we just set up and invited people in parks and things like that to have an opportunity to talk to them about the needs that we saw in Haiti and some of the things that we were trying to do there. And I would do the same kind of thing. It's just say, okay, I would like for people to see the need for evangelism and missions around the world, not just in Haiti or somewhere like that, but even in your local community like Wellington, and the needs that are right here around us, and just try to raise people's awareness through something like that.
And if if it gets to a point where you can't ride that bike, Nancy can always push you in a cart.
That's right. Well, Jim and I said our next one will be electric scooters. So.
That'll work too. Sorry, Nancy. Anyway, do you have a favorite vacation spot or activity?
Well, I talked about the cycling, and that's probably a favorite activity. I can't say that there's any one place that I would think of as a family vacation or something like that. I have always wanted to go back to Nigeria. Nigeria is very unstable. It's not a safe place to go. I would love to take Nancy to Nigeria and show her all the different places I lived as I grew up in Nigeria. So I guess that would be a place that,
Sure.
not a favorite vacation spot by any means, but a place that I would love to go back to if God ever settles Nigeria down, that it's safe to go there again.
Great. Um, our church has brought you on staff as an associate pastor, minister of discipleship. Speak for a moment about the relationship, because in discipleship, there needs to be somebody who is mentoring a student, a person younger in the faith. Speak for a moment about that relationship.
Well, I think that we have the idea of discipleship as being some sort of this very high spiritual, you have to be a pastor or some church leader or something to be in discipleship. I think every believer should be in some level of discipleship, and understanding that discipleship, in my opinion, if you will, starts even before a person comes to Christ. There's a process, and so many people that I have led to the Lord will say, oh yeah, my friend so-and-so was talking to me about these things, and then I have the opportunity to lead them to Christ. So that starts there. But every believer should have someone that they might be able to think of and say, okay, here's a person that I can mentor, that I can disciple, and bring them along in their walk with the Lord. And that's what I would see here, is that we would develop a network of people in the church that would pick out one or two people. And it doesn't need to be a class. It doesn't need to be a regular Bible study. It just needs to be a relationship that you build with somebody. And that's where I have found the most effective relationships. You do stuff together. Go out for breakfast, work on a car, get in some kind of a work project, go on a mission team. Whatever it might be, those are the places where you are going to have the opportunity to disciple people and to plug into their lives. And that's what Jesus did. When he didn't necessarily start out with his disciples with a whole lot of deep spiritual truths. He just taught them. He said, "Follow me. Just walk with me and see what I'm doing and duplicate it." That's how I see discipleship.
Yeah, it's developing those relationships that are love relationships because of God's love for us, and they become friendships. And it's the kind of people that, regardless of where your journey may take you from them, you'll stay in contact with them.
Amen.
It's that's the family of God.
Amen.
Just the beauty of how it works. Well, Pastor George, thank you for your time to be with us. I trust that this has given those of you that are hearing this some insight to Pastor George and his life. I'm not going to ask him what his favorite color is, but I'm just going to ask him, do you have any closing words that you want to just share?
Well, I think that, there's a lot going on in our world today. We just came through a presidential election, and regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, if you will, there's a lot of ups and downs right now. People are trying to figure out what's going on, what's going to happen to our economy. Probably the leading thing on people's mind is the current pandemic and all the things that are affecting us in our businesses and in church, and every turn we have different things coming along that way. I think that the bottom line in all of this is we trust the Lord, put our faith in Him. The pandemic did not surprise God.
No.
Our economic situation does not surprise God. But we have, I think, a responsibility to walk faithfully with Him. If you are not currently having a regular time of Bible reading and prayer, start. If nothing else, start with the daily devotional that Pastor Terry does Monday through Thursday. That's a great place to start. And listen to the teaching of God's Word. Spend time in prayer. Make up a simple prayer list of your family and friends, your church, the places where you hear prayer requests. Add them to your prayer list and make that a regular part of your life. The strongest times that I've had in my walk with the Lord have been the times when I have had a consistent daily quiet time. And right now I spend about 20 to 30 minutes a day in prayer and Bible reading. And it will change your life if you're not doing it now. Start. That would be probably the only wisdom I can give you at this point.
That's a great word. Pastor George Callister, we're delighted to have him on staff here at First Baptist Church of Wellington. Thank you for listening. Have a blessed day. Have a safe day. We'll look forward to worshiping with you this coming Sunday.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Great job.
Now I'll get the feedback from Nancy.